You guys ever have those days where a cyclone has trapped you in and you can't get out? Your power's gone in the house, so your fridge, your lights, nothing's working. And it starts hailing wildly. Yeah, today was kind of one of those days. So I thought, the world's trying to give me a signal. These inconveniences have happened and it's surely got to be for one thing. I have to start my content creation journey now. So to begin my content creation journey, I'm gonna try and figure out the 3 basics of how to use a camera. But before we jump into ISO, aperture, and shutter speed, I'm gonna quickly get changed because I am drenched. 2 seconds, hold on. So for the rest of this video, we're breaking it down into 3 parts where we talk about aperture, shutter speed, and ISO, along with the unique effects that each one of them has. By the end of this video, I'm hoping that you understand how each one of these works and how to use them to make your videos even better. Let's jump in. Aperture it's that hole in the lens that you can open and close to let more or less light into the camera sensor that's behind it. It's kind of similar to like the iris in an eye. Opens and closes depending on the amount of light that's coming in. There's 2 main purposes. The first is brightness and exposure, and the second is depth of field. Let me run you through how it works. So on my camera, you can see here that it's listed as f4.0, f short for f-stop or focal stop. And you can see that as we begin to brighten the shot, the number will decrease. And then as we begin to close the aperture and make it darker, the number will actually increase. And the reason for this is because f-stop is actually a ratio of the focal length of your lens and the diameter of the aperture opening. I tried doing a little drawing to explain it, but it sucks. So I'm just gonna put it there instead so you can see. So for example, if we've got a lens with a focal length of 50 millimeters and the diameter of the aperture opening is 25 millimeters, then we've got an f2. If that's too much, all you need to remember is that the lower the f-stop number, the wider the aperture opening. In reverse, the higher the f-stop, the smaller the aperture opening. Cool? Cool. So besides exposure or brightness, Aperture has another really cool feature, which is depth of field. Let me show you. So we're gonna use my little friend here, the Lego character, as an example, right? And what I'm gonna do is I wanna show you the focal length that we can change with the aperture. So if I just put him here and I duck out of this shot, it's gonna try and get my face otherwise. You can see that the Lego character is perfectly in focus. Behind it's a little bit blurry, in front's a little bit blurry. Now if we open up the aperture blades, oh, other way, you can see that now my finger that's in front of the Lego character, super blurry. And behind it, also blurry. So if I sit there, you can see that I start coming into focus about there. So the Lego character is in focus, my face is not, my finger is not, only the Lego character. And so what we've done, we've opened up the aperture really wide, which has narrowed our depth of field in the shot. So it's just here, not before, not after. Now, if we rotate this the other way and we make it darker because we're closing the blades, what we're also gonna do is get a more broad depth of field, right? Where now, put on its lowest setting, in this shot, now that the aperture blades are super closed, I'm in focus back here, my finger at the very front is also in focus, and so is the Lego character. And what we've done is by closing the aperture blades, we've expanded that field of view, right? The depth of field. So if we think of this from a standpoint of creativity, you can use depth of field to highlight something in a story and draw more focus to it. Whether you want to be drawing focus to a word on a piece of paper, you know, the face of a main character, or even the positive potato that my mum got me for Christmas, you can draw attention to it using depth of field. So just a quick recap, aperture is brightness and exposure and depth of field. Cool, now on to part 2, shutter speed. So a quick explanation as to what shutter speed is. It's the opening and closing of your camera shutter and the duration of time that it's open to allow light into the sensor that's behind it. Now let me show you how this kind of looks in practice. So right now I'm filming this on 25 frames per second and we've got the setting now at 1/50, so just double that. This motion blur that we see right now on this camera is very similar to what we have in our eyes in real life. So it's quite easy to view. Now, as I decrease the shutter speed, you'll see that we begin to introduce more light into the shot, but we also have a lot more of a blurry shot that comes with it. And it has like this dreamy feeling almost. The reason for this is that we open up the shutter for longer, allowing more light into the shot, which creates that blur. Now, if we do the opposite and we start to increase that shutter speed, so we'll bring it back, we'll run it up, you can see that the shot becomes a lot darker really quickly, and that it's almost sharper. The reason for this is because the speed in which the shutter is opening and closing is so much faster, allowing less light into it, which reduces the blur overall. And so we get what looks like more of a crisp, faster shot as opposed to blurry with no motion blur involved. If you think about how you can use this creatively, what you can do is decrease the shutter speed to get more airy or drunk type vibes because you're getting a lot more motion blur. But if you want to capture something that is fast paced in detail, you'd want to crank that shutter speed up to capture the most minute details in each one of those shutters. So just a quick recap on shutter speed. It affects your brightness and exposure and your motion blur / sharpness in the image or video. Now moving on to the last but not least is ISO. ISO is a little bit different to the last two that we did, aperture and shutter speed, because it doesn't rely on any physical part inside the lens or the camera in order for it to work. It's all digital. The way that it does work, it changes the camera sensor's light sensitivity without any moving parts. It's all digital. So jumping back to the camera, you can see that the shot already is quite dark. What I've done is I've changed the settings, the shutter speed to 500, the f-stop to 16. The goal of this is to make the shot quite dark so that we have to rely on ISO to bump that brightness up. So I'm going to jump into ISO settings. I'm going to start increasing it. And what you're going to find is that the shot is getting brighter. But there's something that's also happening in this, is that the shot itself is going to be super noisy. This is the payoff of using ISO. Because it's not a physical part, it's a digital setting, it can only go so high before it starts to have some issues like this. And so this leads on to my next point of understanding the 3 points of the exposure triangle so that you can get the shot that you want. There's gonna be some times where you wanna focus on getting a really, really nice depth of field and focusing on the aperture, and then using shutter speed and ISO to kind of support that underneath it. There's gonna be some times where you're filming something super fast paced and you need to use aperture and ISO to be able to help support that. And so it's all just about understanding how each of them work so that you can get the best shot possible. And all of this comes with practice. I've made countless vids where, you know, it was way too overexposed or way too underexposed. And the only way to properly understand all this is to go out there and try it. If you're a little bit confused on where to start, I've actually linked a free exposure challenge where you've got 8 different situations that you can go out and try. And by the end of it, you'll feel like a pro with the basics. So once again, if you want that, it's in the description, it's all free. But that's enough talking from me. Thanks again for watching. Go create something. Bye.